Tawana Petty from the Detroit Community Technology Project and Bryce Huffman from Bridge Detroit. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us, man.
I appreciate you guys coming on. Tawana, we'll start with you. Tell us about the Detroit Community Technology Project and what it's supposed to accomplish.
Thank you. So Detroit Community Technology Project is interested in the ways that digital and data information is shared, stored, collected, and utilized to either support with community members making a living or unable to make a living. The information that's utilized through corporations and government institutions. And we also do a lot through our Equitable Internet initiative regarding internet access, and really have been involved with the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition for about 11 years. And so really we work around digital access, equity, data privacy, and those sorts of things.
Data privacy, that's actually something that, I've been thinking about in the wake of facial recognition. Is the Detroit Community Technology Project involved with advocating for justice, technology justice, in the wake of facial recognition?
Yes, absolutely. We've been one of the frontline organizers. As a matter of fact, I received the call that let Detroit know that facial recognition was in the city. So the Georgetown Center for Privacy and Technology called us and said, do you know that your Project Greenlight system is being utilized with facial recognition? And I said, no, we didn't know that. We were already advocating against Project Greenlight because we knew that the mass surveillance was not going to be a good thing for a predominantly Black city. But to find out that facial recognition was a component a year into the contract was extremely disheartening, especially knowing the research about facial recognition being, algorithmically biased against darker skin tones, women of color, and pretty much anybody who doesn't look like the typical white male person that the algorithms were trained on. And so it was very disheartening. And we've been on the front lines of that struggle for almost 2 years now.
2 years. Somebody will say this as a rebuttal that, news broke today that the Detroit News broke that Detroit is leading the nation in violent crime. Bryce, what is your reaction to that while we are having this discussion around surveillance and public safety?
Well, my question in the wake of that would be, have any of these programs like Project Greenlight or having facial recognition technology and live surveillance, has any of that made the city less dangerous? Like, has any of that stopped crime or helped reduce crime? Has any of that made the city feel safer to people who actually live and work here? And I would say not really. Sure, you can point to some types of crimes that have gone down since Project Greenlight came into the fold, but the idea that we're doing this and investing all this money into something that has all of these civil rights implications, has all of these potentials to lead to more wrongful arrests than the ones we've already seen. The idea that, sure, we have a lot of crime, so let's keep investing in these things, that falls apart once you look at, all right, well, how effective are these things at stopping crime? Have these things actually made a difference in the neighborhoods that are stricken by crime? Or, like Project Greenlight tends to show us, and like the city tries to tout every time they mention Project Greenlight, has it made business owners feel safer? And I think that while, yes, we want business owners to feel safer and feel like their businesses won't be robbed or have any issues with crime, the whole idea of Project Greenlight is to make Detroiters feel safer. And, we're not really seeing anything concrete that points to that.
Tawana, Detroit leading the nation in violent crime, and you're in a fight against surveillance and facial recognition. How do you react to that?
I mean, I react similarly to Bryce. We've spent nearly $30 million on both of these systems since 2016, and they have not made any drastic reductions in crime. Also, we always know what reduces crime. Resource neighborhoods reduce crime. general lighting in neighborhoods reduces crime. I mean, you don't need a vivid imagination. Just drive 10 minutes outside the city and see the neighborhoods that have lower crime. They have grocery stores, they have recreation centers, they have adequate public housing infrastructure and public schools. And so, you know, surveillance has never been a solution to crime. And I don't understand why in a predominantly Black city, when 13 cities across the country so far and counting have banned facial recognition, which happen to be predominantly white cities, I might add, are saying that this is a racially biased technology, that they will not subject their residents who are Black and brown to this technology. Are they're banning it, they're standing up against it, and then the Blackest city in America is doubling down and spending more money on it instead of resources into the communities, which could actually reduce crime. Quality of life issues create quality of life crimes.
Bryce, facial recognition, you've been following this a lot in your reporting. What have you uncovered and what stories are being told in the stratosphere around this facial recognition technology? Is it working? Is it not working?
So I found two really, I think, important things when it comes to facial recognition. And the first is that a lot of Detroiters don't have a full understanding of how the system works and how facial recognition technology leads to arrests. And the second thing is, when you do understand it, you're wholly against the technology being used here. Outside of the people who work for the police department and people who are city officials, people who understand how it goes from an image on a security camera or in security camera footage to the arrest warrant to the arrest, people who understand that process see that, well, using something that, according to the chief himself, only works 4% of the time, to arrest people, that just doesn't make sense. That seems like a system that is built to harm more and more innocent Black people than it's going to help. Mm-hmm. So when we look at that, those are like the things that really jump out to me. The other thing that jumps out to me is that despite the data showing that it only works 4% of the time, the chief is, defending it at every turn. The department invited me to the Real-Time Crime Center to kind of see how it operates. And while that visit did ease some of my worries about the technology and its use, it didn't stop the fact that they're using a system that is racist. And when I say racist, I mean it's known to misidentify Black and brown faces in a city that's 80% Black. But they keep defending its use despite those numbers, despite the wrongful arrest that we've seen with Robert Williams and Michael Oliver. Despite the fact that, nationally and globally, we're kind of having a reckoning with how we police Black communities. Despite all of those things, the chief and the people in the department are just backing it 100%.
Tawana, where is the data coming from in these systems? Where is the police getting the photos? Is my photo in this database somehow? Where is all of these pictures and things coming from?
Yeah, so any person in the state of Michigan who has taken an ID at the Secretary of State since 1999 is in that database. So we're literally all in a virtual lineup, not just in Detroit, but in the entire state of Michigan. And so that's why you saw a Robert Williams get arrested for something in Detroit when he hadn't even traveled to Detroit. He lives in Farmington Hills. And so his image is in that database. And anytime they're looking for someone, they're flipping through every person in the state of Michigan to look for that person. So imagine being in a perpetual lineup, hoping that this faulty algorithm somehow exonerates you of a crime. And you're sitting at home watching television, not even knowing that you're part of an investigation. They also use images from social media and any other images that they can take. I've seen officers in various cities, including Detroit, take take photo images at protests and things. So they can use those images. Now, when they first entered into the facial recognition contract, they had real-time crime surveillance, which means that they could have taken a cell phone and marked somebody real time on the spot and connected them to the system and identified them in that point. But because of protests and activism over the last 2 years, they had to issue a more stringent policy and get rid of real-time crime surveillance. We saw in Baltimore at the Freddie Gray protest that officers scanned the audience of protests and picked people up for tickets and other warrants in the middle of protests. So, you know, right now we're going by, you know, the DPD's promise not to misuse this technology. But if the trend that we're seeing in any other law enforcement agency across the globe is any indication, it will be misused.
Tawana, let's talk about this contract. What are the conversations like at the city council table? You've gone on record about your stance against the contract with the data company. What's happening, and when is the council supposed to vote? And do you feel like this contract is going to happen or not?
Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of faith in most of city council doing the right thing and standing on the right side of history. I've been attending city council meetings as well as the Board of Police Commissioner meetings now consistently for the last couple of years, and pretty much the same people who were voting, you know, who were against the system are still against the system, and the folks that were for the system are for the system. And that's regardless of data scientists, that's regardless of research, that's regardless of 13 bans across the country, that's regardless of federal legislation that's being pushed, state legislation. Rest in peace, Isaac Robinson. He was pushing through legislation to try to get a 5-year moratorium banning all use of facial recognition for DPD and government. And he passed away from COVID-19. So I like to lift his name up for that work. But yeah, it's pretty obvious that the folks who are sold on the idea are going to stay sold on the idea, with the exception of a couple of people. I will say that there's a couple of people, Castaneda Lopez and Mary Sheffield on Detroit City Council, who have come out and said, hey, we voted for this, but now we've actually studied the research, listened to the community, and we're no longer in favor of this technology. And so they've helped with instituting a Detroiters Bill of Rights that many Detroiters have gotten behind, that would, if we don't win the vote on Tuesday, September 29th, that ultimately we will try to get something pushed through the charter and get it on the ballot next year to get this technology out of our city and hopefully out of the state of Michigan, and ultimately, hopefully everyone in the world will stop using it. And I'll finally say, if we look at China, and we look at the trajectory that Detroit is moving in, we're rapidly moving towards a social credit system where everything you do is under surveillance at all times. And as an example, if you throw some trash into the trash can that should have gone in recycling in China, your social credit score goes down. And so the way that has impacted community members is some people are unable to travel different places or even get on airplanes because their social credit is too low. And we already know poverty has been a form of social control in Detroit, and we don't want to automate racism. We don't want to automate stop and frisk. And those are the sorts of things that we're aligning with if we continue to let the rapid expansion of Project Greenlight and facial recognition continue in Detroit.
Bryce and Tawana, what do we know about this contractor, this data contractor? What do we know about them? Where are they from? And who's giving them the data that they use?
That's actually a great question. One of the things we do know is that the company that they're contracting with, DataWorks Plus, is a company out of South Carolina, I believe. And I tried to interview the CEO, but surprise, surprise, he didn't want to talk to a young Black reporter about facial recognition technology. But another thing we know about the contract is that, and this is the thing I think is underrated about the situation our city finds itself in, City Council doesn't have to approve this contract. They could say no to it. They could vote to not use this technology. And I think that's the thing that we should be focused on right now is it's not a foregone conclusion that we have racist, ineffective technology here that harms Black lives and Black families. We could put it into it. We could have them not renew the contract. They already spend quite a bit of money on this surveillance technology that hasn't really yielded in us being a safer city.
Let's switch gears and talk about narrative framing around surveillance. The chief says, the mayor says that green light will make us safer, that facial recognition technology will make us safer. Will it? That's the narrative. Will that actually happen?
No, it's making property safer. And Dr. King asked us to have a radical revolution of values back in the 60s, where we prioritize people over property, profit margins, and machines. And what's happening is we are prioritizing property, profit margins, and machines over people in Detroit. And what folks don't understand is when a business signs up for Project Greenlight, they're essentially paying for priority policing. They become a priority one under this system. And law enforcement, we know in Detroit, is already overwhelmed. So they're not, if they're prioritizing businesses, for the folks who believe that policing creates safety, you're not going to be prioritized with the green light system. The goal that they want is to flood the city with these cameras so that they can automate some of this policing. And that is not what I think community members were looking for when they chose to sign up or get behind Project Greenlight. And I know community members didn't get behind facial recognition because they weren't told it was even part of it. And even business owners that we talked to were not told that face recognition was going to be part of Project Greenlight. And so the thing that I worry most about, in addition to us not being made safer, but actually creating more harm, is the fact that the longer this goes, the less transparency we're going to have. We know that we know about Robert Williams and Michael Oliver because the officer at the time disclosed that information. Now it is tremendously difficult to find out how face recognition is being used, who's being arrested using it, or any of that data, because they're not going to make the same mistake 3 times.
Bryce, you have anything to
add? She basically covered what I was going to say. There's 2 cases we know about right now where innocent people were wrongfully arrested. And the whole strategy that the department used when those cases became public was kind of to just play it off, say that, well, we have a policy in place now to make sure those types of arrests don't happen. But, you know, there was no look at, well, why are we investing in technology that leads to wrongful arrests? Why are we investing in technology that only works 4% of the time? Would you invest in a company that only had success 4% of the time? No, of course not. Why do it here? Why do it in a city that's 80% Black?
The chief has gone on national television and local outlets touting that Detroit hasn't seen the same level of violence in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests happening worldwide, and especially here in America in cities like Minneapolis and in the city of Detroit. And he's thanking the Detroit Police Department for making sure that violence hasn't erupted in the city. Who do we thank for that? Do we thank the Detroit Police Department? Do we thank the activists that are organizing peaceful protests? Where does that, who should we be thanking? Where does that thanks go, Tawana?
Ooh, I think it's, look, let me say, there are officers that I love with all of my soul on the department, right? But I think that it's dangerous for us to lift up the notion that repression, militarization, violent policing, tear gassing, and those sorts of things are ways to contain human beings who are exercising their civil liberties and civil rights. I think that there has not been enough de-escalation in these instances. I've watched protests that were peaceful. And if we want to say that they're not peaceful because people are saying things that hurt the feelings of officers, I think that's a dangerous notion to think that we can respond violently because we don't like what people are saying. I've seen people locked arms, not doing anything, and be pummeled onto the ground. I mean, the video footage is out there. And it's not to say that there aren't a small number of individuals who might do some things to try to get some agitation started. But if we can do a wide analysis over protests based on a couple of individuals, then how is it that there's so much resistance in labeling police departments as violent when just a few individuals murder unarmed Black people?
Wow. What is the community's relationship with the police department from your vantage points? Bryce, we'll start with you.
That depends on the community member you ask, right? So Detroit's a fairly big city. It's the biggest city in the state. It's a city with over 600,000 residents. If you ask younger Detroiters how they feel about the police, they might be a little bit more antagonistic, especially as of late when they see, like Tawana said, videos of police pepper spraying people directly in the face after they're handcuffed, pictures of police choking young women at protests. They're gonna see these things and they're gonna connect the dots to what's going on nationally and have a negative view of their police department. If you ask older Detroiters who might have some political connections, though, they love the police department. They love that the department has kept some of these violent situations from occurring in this city in their, view. So really, the community's relationship with the police is only as good as the police are at doing their job. If you live in a neighborhood that is adequately policed and you don't see them violating people's rights, chances are you love the department, especially because most Detroiters know a few people own the department. I know I do. I know most of my friends do. If you ask people who live in rougher areas that see the police treat people like criminals even when they're not doing anything wrong, well, then you're going to have a completely different view of how the department operates.
Tawana, how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I see it similarly. I grew up with a wealth of respect for law enforcement. There are many in my family, and retired ones in my family. However, I think that it is a mistake to not tackle the institution as a whole. It's not about individual officers. We have to look at the legacy and lineage of what policing actually is. And the more you know, the more that you struggle against the things you see that are wrong. Facial recognition and Project Greenlight similarly. If we look at the 18th century lantern laws, Simone Brown wrote a tremendous book about this. If we look at the 18th century lantern laws, Project Greenlight is a direct lineage of the sort of thinking that made the 18th century lantern laws, which made it so that if you were a Black person that was not in the presence of a white person, you had to hold a lit lantern in front of your face. And I would argue that if you look in Black and brown communities that have this type of surveillance, it is directly tied to gentrification and changing the demographics of the city. And so the whole goal of this is to make profit, to make newer white residents feel safer at the expense of Black residents. And I know folks don't want to talk about that, but we're at a reckoning in this country, like Bryce said, where we have to be challenging the institutions that are perpetuating racism and violence, even when we love and know people that work within them.
Last question, we got to wrap it up. Chief Craig has been quite the media figure lately, especially on national outlets like Fox News. And he is getting some heat around comments that he made last week on Fox and Friends around protesters being secretly funded by outside Marxists. What do you make of Chief Craig's claims? But more importantly, what do you make of an appointed public official participating in this kind of punditry on Fox News? Tawana, we'll start with you and we'll end with Bryce.
It's making our lives even more dangerous. I can't tell you how many threatening messages I have to block on social media from folks who are championing Trump and saying things like facial recognition doesn't recognize you because all Black people look alike. And these are the news stations that he's choosing to put narratives out on, news stations that are perpetuating racial violence against Black people. I can't make any sense of it, to be honest with you.
Bryce?
I have so many thoughts on the interviews he's done on Fox News, but I think the latest one, it really did get me to a point where I'm confused as to what his goal is. Because if his goal as a police chief in a Black city is to protect Black and brown bodies in Black communities, well, using or mirroring their talking points doesn't do that, right? Mirroring the idea that, organized protesting is somehow equated to criminality is a problem if you're trying to protect Black and brown bodies in Black and brown communities. The whole idea that they're Marxist, like he's just hitting on hot button right-wing talking points. And maybe he has a point in doing this other than to convince us that law enforcement is good and protesters are bad. But I don't understand the strategy behind it. I don't understand why demonize people who live here and work here and want things to be better for the people here, just because you disagree with how they choose to protest. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. Chief Craig, hopefully you see this somehow and change your ways. But until then, I think he's going to keep catching heat from people because he goes on a cable news network that is known as a beacon of white supremacy.
Yeah, and Donald Trump actually complimented him, and so that didn't help him either. I really want to double down on this narrative of outsiders, right? Really quickly, the mayor released a statement in response to the fire that Chief Craig was under, and he says clearly Chief Craig is frustrated by police resources he has had to use to deal with largely out-of-town protesters, and sometimes express himself in a way the mayor would not. And I want to zero in on this narrative that has been perpetuated over and over again around outside protesters. And my question to the both of you, Tawana, especially you as an activist, what is wrong with out of town outside protesters? Martin Luther King Jr. was born and raised in Atlanta. He was from Atlanta. So anywhere else he went that was not Atlanta, he was an outsider. So help me understand why this is a talking point.
You know, I don't know. It's the lowest hanging fruit, I guess. I mean, we literally live in a city that's been disinvested in, abandoned, and discriminated against. And now that we have white allies and co-liberators, I like to say collective liberation, co-liberators in our defense. Now people want to talk about outsiders. They don't talk about outsiders in gentrification. They don't talk about outsiders when folks come in, build businesses, spend their, collect money and go back to their communities. They don't talk about outsiders then, but now that you have folks coming here to support us, Black-led resistance, I might add, support that those initiatives for civil liberties, now as outsiders. And I would caution the chief in trying to push that narrative for, because then you'll have to look at every institution in the city that brings in outsiders for their own agendas. And I think that is a dangerous narrative to continue to perpetuate. And I think that anyone who is invested in the dignity and humanity of Black people is welcome in Detroit.
That's going to do it for us. Tawana Petty from the Detroit Community Technology Project and Bryce Huffman from Bridge Detroit. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you
for having us, man.